On a cold, rain-soaked evening in downtown Chicago, the streets were nearly deserted. The wind howled through narrow alleyways, carrying with it the sharp scent of wet pavement and the distant hum of car engines. Clara Thompson stood outside, her small community shelter, pulling her worn coat tighter around herself as she prepared to lock up for the night. It had been another long day filled with endless tasks, sorting donations, serving meals, and comforting those who came seeking refuge from life's hardships. Her body ached, and her mind was heavy with thoughts of all the people still out there struggling against the biting chill. Just as she reached for the padlock, something caught her eye. Across the street, under the flickering light of a broken street lamp, a man sat huddled against the concrete wall of an overpass. His clothes were drenched, clinging to his frame like a second skin, and his shoulders shook violently as he tried to fend off the freezing rain. Even from a distance, Clara could see the exhaustion etched into his face. He looked utterly lost, as though the world had swallowed him whole and left him stranded in this desolate corner of the city. Without thinking twice, Clara grabbed the spare blanket she always kept near the entrance and stepped out into the storm. The icy droplets stung her cheeks as she crossed the street, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected the dim glow of the lampposts. As she approached, the man lifted his head slightly, revealing eyes clouded with both fear and resignation. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Clara felt a pang of sadness. She'd seen countless faces like his before, people beaten down by circumstances beyond their control. But there was something different about this man, something unplaceable. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "You look like you could use some help." The man hesitated, his lips trembling as though he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, he managed a faint nod. Up close, Clara noticed details she hadn't seen from afar. His tailored suit, now soaked and mud-streaked, the expensive leather shoes, scuffed and waterlogged, and the remnants of what must have once been a perfectly groomed appearance. Whoever this man was, he clearly didn't belong here, not in these conditions, not in this part of town. "I run a shelter just across the way," Clara continued, holding out the blanket. "It's warm inside, and we've got food if you're hungry. Would you like to come in?" For a few seconds, the man simply stared at her, as if trying to decide whether to trust her or flee. Then, slowly, he accepted the blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Clara smiled warmly. "No problem. Let's get you out of this weather." As they walked back toward the shelter, the man stumbled slightly, leaning on Clara for support. She guided him carefully, noticing how thin and fragile he felt beneath the layers of damp fabric. When they reached the door, she ushered him inside, where the faint scent of soup and freshly baked bread greeted them. The room was modestly furnished, with mismatched chairs and tables scattered around, but it radiated warmth, a stark contrast to the cold brutality of the night outside. Clara led him to a chair near the heater and handed him a steaming cup of tea. "Drink this, it'll warm you up," she instructed gently, "and I'll grab some dry clothes for you." While she rummaged through a box of donated items, the man sipped the tea, his hands shaking so badly that some of the liquid sloshed onto the floor. Clara returned with a pair of sweatpants and a hoodie, setting them down beside him. "Here you go. Take your time changing. There's no rush." He nodded gratefully but said nothing, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his cup. Clara watched him for a moment, curious about his story but unwilling to pry. She knew better than to push too hard. Everyone who came to her shelter carried burdens they weren't ready to share. Instead, she busied herself tidying up the kitchen area, giving him space to collect his thoughts. After a while, the man re-emerged wearing the borrowed clothes, looking slightly more composed despite the haunted expression still lingering in his eyes. I don't know how to thank you," he said haltingly. "I didn't think anyone would stop." Clara shrugged, offering him a reassuring smile. "That's what we're here for. No one should have to face the night alone." They fell into an easy silence, the rhythmic ticking of the clock filling the gaps between words. Clara glanced at him occasionally, wondering what had brought him to this point. Was he homeless? Running from trouble? Or maybe just having the worst day of his life? Whatever the reason, she decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was safe. For now. As the hours passed, the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. Lightning illuminated the windows, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Clara lit a few candles, their soft glow adding a touch of calm to the otherwise chaotic atmosphere. She offered the man a bowl of soup, which he accepted with quiet gratitude. "You can stay here tonight," she told him. "We've got cots in the back if you need somewhere to sleep." The man hesitated, then nodded again. "Just for one night," he whispered, almost to himself. "I can't stay longer than that." Clara didn't press him for details. She simply nodded and pointed him toward the sleeping area. As he settled onto a cot, pulling the blanket tightly around himself, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than met the eye. But now all she could do was offer him shelter and hope that tomorrow would bring clarity. The next morning, the rain had eased into a drizzle, and the shelter buzzed with its usual early activity. Volunteers bustled about, organizing supplies and preparing breakfast for those who had spent the night. Clara moved through the chaos, with practiced ease, her mind occasionally drifting back to the mysterious man she had helped the previous evening. She hadn't expected him to stay beyond that one night, but when she checked the sleeping area, she found him still there, sitting on the edge of the cot with a faraway look in his eyes. He seemed out of place among the others, not because he was unwelcome, but because he carried himself differently, like someone unused to uncertainty. His posture was rigid, his movements deliberate, as if every action required conscious effort. Yet, despite his obvious discomfort, he didn't complain or ask for special treatment. Instead, he quietly observed the rhythm of the shelter, watching how people interacted and how Clara navigated the constant demands of her role. Clara approached him cautiously, balancing 2 plates of scrambled eggs and toast. "Hungry?" she asked, offering him one of the plates. He blinked, startled by her voice, then accepted the food with a murmured, "Thank you." As he ate, Clara took a seat beside him, curious, but careful not to pry. "How are you feeling today?" she ventured. "Better," he replied after a pause, his tone guarded yet polite. "Warmer." She nodded, studying him. There was something oddly familiar about him, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way he spoke, clear and measured, or the faint lines of stress etched into his face. Whatever it was, it made her wonder what had driven him to this point. Had he lost his job, his home, or was it something deeper, something more personal? "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you need," Clara said finally. "We're not fancy, but we do our best to help." The man hesitated, his fork hovering over his plate. "I appreciate that," he said softly, "but I shouldn't impose." Clara waved off his concern. "It's no imposition. Everyone here has their own story, and we're just glad to offer a little support while they figure things out." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, the man looked like he might say something else. But instead, he focused on finishing his meal, his expression unreadable. Later that afternoon, Clara noticed the man lingering near the storage room, where volunteers were sorting donations. She joined him, surprised to find him picking up a box of canned goods and carrying it inside without being asked. "You don't have to do that," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I want to," he replied simply. "You've done so much for me already. It's the least I can do." His willingness to pitch in caught her off guard. Most people who came to the shelter were too overwhelmed by their circumstances to think about helping others, but this man seemed genuinely eager to contribute. Over the next few days, he became a fixture in the shelter, assisting with everything from cleaning to organizing supplies. He worked quietly and efficiently, rarely speaking unless spoken to, but his presence brought a sense of calm to the otherwise chaotic environment. As they worked side by side, Clara began to piece together fragments of his personality. He had a dry sense of humor that surfaced unexpectedly, often catching her off guard and making her laugh. He was also startlingly knowledgeable about topics she wouldn't have expected: finance, technology, even art history. At first, she chalked it up to him being well-read, but some of his comments hinted at first-hand experience. Once, when she mentioned struggling to secure funding for the shelter, he casually suggested strategies she'd never considered, using terms like venture capital and philanthropic partnerships that sounded more suited to a boardroom than a community center. "Where did you learn all that?" she asked, intrigued. He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Just stuff I picked up along the way." Clara let it drop, sensing he wasn't ready to elaborate. Still, his insights proved invaluable. With his guidance, she managed to streamline some of the shelter's operations, freeing up time and resources for other projects. It was clear he had a knack for problem-solving, though he downplayed his contributions whenever she thanked him. Despite his growing involvement, the man remained an enigma. He avoided questions about his past, deflecting them with vague answers or changing the subject entirely. Clara respected his privacy, but couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something back. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of the kitchen after most of the residents had gone to bed, she decided to broach the topic gently. "You know," she began, stirring a cup of tea, "you've been a huge help around here. Everyone appreciates it, including me. But I can't help wondering, why are you really here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The man stiffened slightly, his fingers tightening around the mug in his hands. For a moment, Clara thought he might shut down completely, retreating behind the same guarded facade he wore when he first arrived. But then, to her surprise, he sighed deeply, as if releasing a weight he'd been carrying for far too long. "I ran away," he admitted quietly. "From everything. My life, my responsibilities, the expectations of people who don't really care about me. I just needed to escape." Clara listened intently, her heart aching for the pain in his voice. "That sounds exhausting," she said softly. "Running away doesn't fix anything, but sometimes it gives you space to breathe. What made you feel like you had to leave?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "A wedding," he said finally. "It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but it felt like suffocation, like I was signing away my freedom before I even realized what it meant." Clara frowned, piecing together his cryptic explanation. "Wait, you were getting married? And you left?" He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I couldn't go through with it, not when I knew it wasn't right. So I walked away. Left everything behind, the suit, the ring, the whole charade. And now—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Now I have no idea what comes next." Clara reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "You'll figure it out," she said firmly. "One step at a time. And until then, you've got a place here. We may not have much, but we take care of each other." Her words seemed to ease some of the tension in his shoulders, though the sadness in his eyes lingered. For the first time since meeting him, Clara saw a glimmer of hope, a fragile, tentative thing, but hope nonetheless. Over the following days, the man opened up a little more, sharing snippets of his life before the shelter. He spoke of a childhood filled with privilege but devoid of genuine connection, of relationships built on convenience rather than trust. He described the relentless pressure to succeed, to conform to expectations set by others, until he felt like nothing more than a puppet dancing on strings. Clara listened patiently, her empathy unwavering. She understood what it meant to feel trapped, even if her own struggles were vastly different. In turn, she shared pieces of her own story, how she'd grown up poor, how losing her parents had taught her the value of resilience, and how she'd dedicated her life to helping others because she knew what it felt like to need help. Their conversations deepened their bond, creating a connection neither of them had anticipated. For the man, it was a revelation, to be seen not as a title or a bank account, but as a person with flaws and fears. For Clara, it was a reminder of why she loved her work, the chance to make a difference even in small ways in someone's life. Yet beneath the surface, a question lingered unanswered. Who was this man really? And what secrets was he still keeping? The days turned into a week, and the shelter became a sort of sanctuary for the man Clara had come to know simply as Alex. He was no longer the shivering stranger who had stumbled in out of the storm. Instead, he had settled into a quiet rhythm, blending in with the daily hum of activity. His presence brought an unexpected stability to the shelter, not because he was extraordinary, but because he was consistent. Every morning, he helped prepare breakfast. Every afternoon, he assisted with sorting donations or cleaning up after meals. And every evening he sat quietly in the corner, lost in thought, as if piecing together fragments of his fractured life. Clara admired his dedication, but she couldn't ignore the lingering mystery surrounding him. Despite his growing openness about his feelings and struggles, there were still gaps in his story, gaps that widened whenever someone mentioned wealth, power, or privilege. It wasn't just his polished demeanor or occasional slip-ups, like referring to private jets in passing. It was the way he carried himself, as though he were constantly holding back. She sensed that the weight of whatever he'd left behind was far heavier than he let on. Meanwhile, outside the shelter's walls, the world hadn't forgotten about Alexander Reed, the billionaire heir whose sudden disappearance had sent shockwaves through high society. News outlets were ablaze with speculation. Was it a kidnapping, a nervous breakdown, or perhaps something more scandalous, a secret affair or financial trouble? Reporters camped outside his family's estate, snapping photos of his distraught fiancé and interviewing friends who claimed they'd seen signs of distress in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Back at the shelter, none of this chaos reached them until one fateful afternoon when a volunteer named Mia walked in carrying a newspaper. The front page featured a grainy photo of Alex in his tuxedo, standing beside a woman dressed in white. Above the image, bold letters screamed, "Billionaire groom vanishes on wedding day." Mia held up the paper, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Clara, does this guy look familiar to you?" Clara froze mid-step, her heart skipping a beat. She took the paper from Mia's hands and stared at the photo. There was no mistaking it. The man in the picture was Alex. Her Alex. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing eyes, the same air of quiet intensity. Only now, he looked polished and poised, worlds away from the disheveled figure who had sought refuge under her roof. Her mind raced. How could she have missed it? The tailored suits, the expensive shoes, the subtle hints he'd dropped about. His background, all of it made sense now. But why hadn't he told her? Why had he chosen to hide such a monumental part of himself? That evening, after most of the residents had gone to bed, Clara found Alex sitting alone in the dimly lit kitchen. He was staring into a cup of tea, his expression distant. She approached him cautiously, holding the crumpled newspaper in her hand. "Alex," she began, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Can we talk?" He looked up, startled, then immediately noticed the paper in her grasp. For a split second, panic flickered across his face before he masked it with resignation. "You saw it," he said flatly. "Yes," Clara replied, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alex sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to," he admitted, "but I didn't know how. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm a billionaire who ran away from my own wedding. You would have treated me differently." "Maybe," Clara conceded, "but not for the reasons you think. I don't care about your money, Alex. That's never been what this place is about. What I care about is honesty and trust." Her words struck a nerve. Alex shifted uncomfortably, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I never meant to deceive you. I just needed a break. From everything. This place, these people, you've all reminded me of what really matters. Kindness, simplicity, humanity. Things I haven't felt in years." Clara studied him, searching for sincerity in his eyes. She found it, but also pain. Pain from a life lived under scrutiny, from expectations that crushed rather than uplifted. Slowly she nodded. "Okay," she said. "I believe you. But you need to understand something. Hiding isn't going to solve your problems. Running away might give you temporary relief, but eventually, you'll have to face the mess you left behind." Alex nodded grimly. "I know," he said. "But facing it means going back to a world I don't want to be part of anymore, a world where people see me as a dollar sign, not a person. And staying here means living a lie," Clara countered gently. "You can't keep pretending to be someone you're not, Alex. Not forever. Sooner or later, the truth will catch up with you, and it'll hurt worse than anything you're running from." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Alex stared into his tea, wrestling with the reality of his situation. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I don't belong anywhere? What if I'm stuck between two worlds, neither of which wants me for who I am?" Clara reached out, placing a hand over his. "Then maybe it's time to create your own world," she said firmly. "One where you get to decide what matters. One where you're free to be yourself, not the version everyone else expects you to be." Over the next few days, Alex seemed quieter than usual, as though grappling with the weight of Clara's advice. He continued helping around the shelter, but there was a new tension in his movements, a restlessness that hadn't been there before. Clara gave him space, knowing he needed time to process everything. Then, one morning, Alex approached her with a determined look in his eyes. "I've made a decision," he announced. "I'm going back." Clara blinked, surprised by the suddenness of his declaration. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted with a wry smile. "But I have to try. I owe it to myself, to everyone involved, to clean up the mess I created. And maybe I can find a way to bridge the gap between the two parts of my life, between who I was and who I want to be." Clara smiled, pride swelling in her chest. "That's brave, Alex, really brave." "I wouldn't have had the courage without you," he said earnestly. "You've shown me that it's possible to live authentically, even in a world that tries to define you." Before leaving, Alex insisted on doing one last thing, making sure the shelter was taken care of. Using connections he hadn't tapped. In years, he arranged for repairs to the building's leaky roof, stocked the pantry with enough food to last months, and secured funding for expanded services. When Clara discovered what he'd done, she was furious at first. "This isn't charity," she snapped, confronting him in the storage room. "We work hard to keep this place running. We don't need handouts." "It's not charity," Alex replied calmly. "It's gratitude. For everything you've given me. For reminding me what it means to truly live." Clara softened, tears welling in her eyes. "Just promise me one thing," she said finally. "When you leave, don't forget us. Don't forget what you've learned here." "I won't," Alex promised. "This place and you have changed me. Forever." With that, Alex packed his few belongings and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. As he walked away, Clara watched him go, hoping against hope that he'd find the balance he so desperately sought. Little did she know their paths were far from finished crossing. Alex stepped back into the world he had fled, but it wasn't the same glittering empire he remembered. The air felt heavier, suffocating, as if the weight of his absence had amplified the expectations waiting for him. Reporters swarmed outside, his family's estate, cameras flashing like strobe lights in a storm. His phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and messages from lawyers, business partners, and acquaintances who suddenly cared deeply about his well-being. The media circus was relentless, painting him as either a victim or a villain depending on the outlet. But Alex didn't care about any of that anymore. He had returned not to appease others but to reclaim control over his life, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to reconcile the two halves of himself. The first person he faced was his fiancée, Evelyn. They met in the opulent sitting room of her parents' mansion, where everything from the crystal chandeliers to the marble floors screamed wealth and privilege. Evelyn looked elegant as always, dressed in a tailored blouse and pencil skirt, but her eyes betrayed a mix of anger and hurt. For hours, they talked, or rather argued, about what had gone wrong. Evelyn accused him of being selfish, of abandoning her at the altar without explanation. Alex countered by admitting he'd never loved her, not in the way she deserved, and that their relationship had been built on convenience rather than genuine connection. "It wasn't just about you," Alex said quietly. "It was about me too. I've spent my entire life doing what everyone else wanted me to do. Marrying you would have been the final nail in the coffin of who I really am." Evelyn stared at him, stunned. "So what now?" she demanded. "You run off to some shelter and pretend to be someone else? That's your grand solution?" "No," Alex replied firmly. "I'm not running anymore. I'm trying to figure out who I am and who I want to be. And I owe it to both of us to be honest about that." Though their conversation ended in tears and unresolved tension, Evelyn eventually agreed to call off the engagement. It wasn't easy. Her family was furious and the fallout dominated headlines for weeks. But Alex stood firm, refusing to let fear dictate his decisions. For the first time in years, he felt like he was standing on solid ground, even if it was shaky and uncertain. Next came the battle with his own family. Alex's father, Richard Reed, was a towering figure in the business world, known for his ruthless ambition and unyielding standards. When Alex arrived at the corporate headquarters to meet with him, the tension was palpable. Richard wasted no time launching into a tirade, berating Alex for embarrassing the family name and jeopardizing lucrative deals. "You've made us a laughingstock," Richard bellowed, slamming his fist on the desk. "Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused? Investors are questioning our stability, board members are losing faith. It's a disaster." Alex listened silently, letting his father vent until the words ran dry. Then calmly he responded, "Dad, I understand why you're upset, but this isn't just about money or reputation. This is about me, about my life. You can't keep treating me like a pawn in your game. I'm your son, not a transaction." Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "You think this is about games? This is about legacy, Alex, everything I've worked for, all the sacrifices I've made. It's so you could carry the torch, but instead you throw it all away for what? Some idealistic nonsense?" "It's not nonsense," Alex shot back. "It's humanity, compassion. Things I learned when I left everything behind. Things I realized I'd been missing my whole life." For a moment, Richard looked genuinely taken aback. Perhaps it was the conviction in Alex's voice or the raw honesty in his eyes. Whatever it was, it forced Richard to pause and listen. Over the course of several meetings, Alex laid out his vision, scaling back his involvement in the company, delegating responsibilities to trusted executives, and focusing on projects that aligned with his values. It wasn't an easy sell, but slowly, grudgingly, Richard began to see the merit in his son's plan. As Alex navigated these turbulent waters, his thoughts often drifted back to Clara and the shelter. She had become a beacon of hope during his darkest days, a reminder of the simplicity and authenticity he craved. Yet the more he thought about her, the more conflicted he felt. How could he possibly bridge the gap between the two worlds he inhabited? Would she even want him to try? The fear of rejection gnawed at him, but so did the desire to prove that he was serious, that he wasn't just another rich man playing at humility. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of negotiations, Alex found himself scrolling through photos on his phone. Among them was a candid shot of Clara, smiling warmly as she served lunch to a group of residents. Her joy was infectious, her kindness unwavering. Looking at her, Alex realized something profound. She hadn't judged him based on his wealth or status. She had seen him for who he truly was, a lost soul searching for meaning. If anyone could help him find his way, it was her. With renewed determination, Alex decided to make one last change before reaching out to Clara. He sold off several luxury properties he no longer needed, donating the proceeds to charitable organizations, including the shelter. It wasn't about buying forgiveness or making amends. It was about giving back, about using his resources to support causes that mattered. He also severed ties with toxic relationships, cutting loose people who had only ever valued him for his bank account. By the time he was ready to return to Chicago, Alex felt lighter, as though he had shed layers of pretense and emerged closer to the person he wanted to be. When Alex finally arrived at the shelter, his heart pounded with anticipation and dread. What if Clara rejected him? What if she saw him as nothing more than the billionaire he'd tried so hard to escape? As he approached the building, he noticed subtle improvements: the freshly painted walls, the new furniture, the expanded kitchen area. It was clear that his earlier contributions had made a difference, but they weren't enough. He wanted to do more, to be more. Inside, Clara was leading a group of volunteers in organizing supplies. When she spotted Alex standing in the doorway, her expression shifted from surprise to cautious curiosity. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching taut between them. Then finally, Alex broke it. "I came back because I realized something important," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves coursing through him. "You've shown me what really matters. Would you let me start over, not as Alexander Reed, but as Alex?" Clara studied him, her gaze searching his face for sincerity. After what felt like an eternity, she smiled. A small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Okay," she said softly, "but only if you promise to stay true to yourself. No masks, no hiding. I promise." Alex replied, relief flooding through him. No more hiding. And with that, Alex took the first step toward building a future rooted in honesty, compassion, and love. A future where he could honor both the lessons of the shelter and the privileges of his past. The weeks that followed Alex's return to Chicago marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for Clara and the shelter as well. At first, their reunion was tentative, like two people tiptoeing around fragile glass, unsure if it would shatter beneath their weight. Clara had agreed to give Alex another chance, but she made it clear that this time, things would be different. He wasn't there as a billionaire looking to fix her world. He was there as Alex, a man seeking purpose and connection. True to his word, Alex threw himself into the work at the shelter with renewed energy. He didn't come in expecting gratitude or special treatment. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work alongside everyone else, chopping vegetables for dinner, sorting through piles of donated clothes, and even helping repair the old furnace when it broke down during a cold snap. His hands were calloused now, his once pristine suits replaced by worn jeans and flannel shirts. To the residents and volunteers, he became simply Alex, the guy who always seemed willing to lend a hand. Clara watched him closely, marveling at how much he had changed since the night she found him shivering under the overpass. Gone was the guarded stranger burdened by secrets and regrets. In his place stood someone more grounded, more authentic, a man unafraid to embrace vulnerability. And yet, despite the progress he'd made, Clara couldn't help but wonder, was this real? Or was it just another phase in his journey toward self-discovery? One evening, after most of the residents had gone to bed, Clara and Alex sat together in the quiet kitchen, sipping cups of tea. The room was warm, lit only by the soft glow of a single overhead bulb. Outside, the city buzzed faintly in the distance, its noise muted by the shelter's thick walls. "You've been here almost a month now," Clara said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "How are you holding up?" Alex smiled faintly, swirling the dregs of his tea. "Honestly, better than I ever thought possible. Being here, it feels right. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Clara raised an eyebrow, skeptical, but curious. "Even though you could be anywhere else? Back in your penthouse signing deals, living the life you were born into?" Alex shook his head firmly. "That's not my life anymore. Not the way it used to be anyway. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all bad, but it wasn't me. Not really. This," he gestured vaguely at the shelter around them, "this is what matters. Helping people, making a difference. That's what I want to wake up for every day." His words resonated deeply with Clara. She had spent years dedicating herself to the shelter, driven by a belief that even small acts of kindness could change lives. Seeing Alex embrace that same philosophy filled her with a sense of pride and hope. Maybe, just maybe, he truly had changed. As the months passed, Alex began using his resources in ways that complemented Clara's vision rather than overshadowed it. He established a foundation aimed at supporting shelters and community centers across the country, channeling funds and expertise to organizations that often struggled to stay afloat. But instead of taking credit or plastering his name on every project, he worked behind the scenes, ensuring that the focus remained on the people being helped. At the same time, he started mentoring some of the shelter's residents, offering guidance and encouragement as they navigated challenges ranging from job searches to rebuilding relationships. One young woman named Maria, who had fled an abusive home, credited Alex with helping her regain confidence and find stable employment. Another resident, an elderly man named Harold, joked that Alex's cooking lessons had turned him into a master chef. These moments of connection brought Alex immense joy, reminding him of why he had chosen this path in the first place. But perhaps the most profound shift occurred within Alex himself. For so long, he had defined success by external markers: wealth, status, power. Now he measured it by the smiles on people's faces, the warmth of shared laughter, the knowledge that he was making a tangible impact. It was humbling, yes, but also liberating. For the first time in his life, he felt free. Of course, the transition wasn't without its challenges. There were days when the weight of his past threatened to pull him back under. Business associates still called, hoping to lure him back into the fold. Tabloids continued to speculate about his relationship with Clara, fueling rumors that ranged from romantic entanglements to charity stunts. Even Richard Reed occasionally reached out, grudgingly impressed by Alex's efforts, but still skeptical of his long-term commitment. Through it all, Clara remained a steady presence, offering support, without judgment. She encouraged Alex to stay focused on his goals, reminding him that true change took time. Together, they faced each obstacle as a team, their bond growing stronger with every hurdle they overcame. One crisp autumn morning, the shelter hosted a small celebration to mark the completion of its expansion project, a new wing dedicated to providing job training and education programs for residents. Volunteers, donors, and community members gathered in the freshly painted space, chatting and laughing as they admired the results of months of hard work. As Clara stood at the podium, preparing to address the crowd, she glanced over at Alex, who was leaning casually against a wall, arms crossed and a proud smile on his face. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not just for everything he had done, but for the person he had become. "Today is a testament to what we can achieve when we come together," Clara began, her voice steady and heartfelt. "This shelter has always been about more than four walls and a roof. It's about hope, about second chances, about believing in the goodness of humanity, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise." She paused, scanning the room before continuing. "And none of this would have been possible without the dedication of our volunteers, the generosity of our supporters, and the resilience of the people who walk through our doors every day. But I'd like to take a moment to thank one person, in particular, someone who reminded me that kindness knows no boundaries and that change is possible no matter where you start." Her eyes met Alex's, and for a brief moment, the rest of the room faded away. "Thank you, Alex," she said simply, her voice cracking slightly, "for showing us all what it means to truly care." The crowd erupted into applause, cheering, as Alex stepped forward, visibly moved. When the noise subsided, he cleared his throat and spoke, his tone humble yet sincere. "I didn't do this alone," he said, glancing around the room. "None of us did. This isn't about one person or one act of generosity. It's about community, about working together to lift each other up. And if I've learned anything these past few months, it's that love and compassion are the strongest forces in the world. They can heal wounds, bridge divides, and transform lives, including mine." As he finished speaking, Clara joined him at the front of the room, her hand slipping into his. The gesture was simple but powerful, a symbol of the partnership they had forged, not just as collaborators but as equals. The months and years that followed, Alex and Clara continued to build a life rooted in shared values and mutual respect. They expanded the foundation's reach, touching countless lives along the way. Alongside their professional endeavors, they nurtured a relationship built on trust, understanding, and a deep appreciation for the beauty of imperfection. Though their journey hadn't been easy, it had been worth it. Together they proved that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in bank accounts or boardrooms, but in the connections we make, the hearts we touch, and the courage to choose authenticity over expectation,